The envelope waited on the kitchen table like a ghost that had finally decided to haunt her. Mary's fingers trembled as she slit it open, her breath catching in her throat like a fishhook snagged on memory. Inside, a single yellowed obituary from 1978 declared Margaret Mary Thompson deceased, taken too soon at 22 by a sudden illness the family mourned deeply. She stared at the paper, the words blurring under the fluorescent light of her Seattle apartment. It wasn't her name exactly, but close enough to twist the knife. Margaret had been her full name back then before she shortened it to Mary to feel less like the girl they'd buried alive. Her family in rural Ohio hadn't bothered with a funeral, no body to lower into the ground, just a quiet announcement in the local paper to erase her from their lives because she'd dared to love a woman. Or at least that's what she'd pieced together from the scraps of letters she'd burned years ago. Now this clipping arrived anonymous, no return address, just a Seattle postmark, like fate had circled back after 4 decades with a cruel punchline. Mary's chest tightened, a sigh escaping her lips, slow and ragged as if exhaling the weight of all those lost years. She was 55 now, lines etched around her eyes from chasing stories across newsrooms and war zones, her hands calloused from typing out truths no one wanted to hear. Investigative journalism had been her armor ever since she'd fled Ohio at 18, clutching a duffel bag and a one-way bus ticket west. She'd built a life here in the Pacific Northwest, rain-slicked streets and coffee shops buzzing with misfits like her. But this obituary mocked it all. Who sent it? And why now? She sank into a chair, the wooden legs scraping against the linoleum, a sound that echoed like bones settling. The apartment smelled of fresh coffee and Jane's lavender soap, faint reminders of normalcy. Jane. God, her heart stuttered at the thought. They had met 20 years ago in a cramped bookstore on Capitol Hill, Mary browsing dog-eared copies of Carson McCullers while Jane recommended poetry that could make you ache in the best way. Jane with her soft Kentucky drawl and eyes that saw straight through your bullshit. They had moved in together after 6 months, a quiet ceremony in a backyard with friends and fairy lights, no family on Mary's side because hers was long gone, or so she'd believed. A key turned in the lock and the door swung open, Jane stepping in with grocery bags rustling against her coat. "Hey darlin'," she said, her voice warm as cornbread fresh from the oven. Spotting Mary's face, she set the bags down quick, crossing the room in 3 strides. "What's wrong? Talk to me." Mary held up the obituary, her throat too thick for words. Jane took it gently, unfolding the paper, her brows knitting together as she read. "Oh honey." She pulled Mary into her arms, strong and steady like an anchor in a storm. They sat like that for what felt like hours, Jane's fingers tracing slow circles on Mary's back, coaxing out the sobs that had been dammed up since 78. When Mary finally spoke, it was in whispers, halting as she recounted the night she'd come out to her parents, the kitchen table in their farmhouse lit by a single bulb, her father's face going stone cold, her mother's tears silent and accusing. "You're dead to us," Head said, not yelling, just flat, like reading a grocery list. And that was it. She'd packed that night, vanished into the bus station's hum. Jane listened without interrupting, her own eyes glistening by the end. "That's not just cruelty, that's a theft," she murmured, pulling back to cup Mary's face. "They stole your grief, your place at the table. But look at you. You built something real. Us. This." Mary leaned into her, touch, a flicker of warmth cutting through the chill. "Yeah. But why send this now? It's like they're saying I'm still that girl running scared. I need to know. I need to go back." Jane's expression shifted, a mix of pride and worry flickering across her features. "Ohio? After all this time? You sure?" Mary nodded, the decision settling like resolve in her bones. "I've chased stories across borders, dodged bullets in deserts. This one's personal. But I can't do it alone." Jane smiled, faint but fierce. "Never asked you to. Well, drive. Make a road trip of it. See the country on our terms." The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, typical Seattle, sending them off with a patter on the windshield as they loaded the old Subaru. Mary's notebook lay open on the passenger seat, scribbled with questions: who sent the clipping, what truths waited in that obituary's shadow. Jane hummed along to Lucinda Williams on the radio, her hand resting easy on Mary's knee, a tether against the miles ahead. They crossed the border into Oregon, the evergreens giving way to rolling hills, the air thickening with the scent of pine and possibility. By evening they reached Portland, craft beer taps foaming in dimly lit bars where they shared fish and chips and stories of younger days. Jane talked about her own coming out in a small Kentucky town, the Bible study group that turned on her overnight. "I thought I'd never breathe easy again," she said over a pint, her voice soft against the murmur of strangers. "Then I met you in that bookstore, and damn if it wasn't like coming home." Mary's laugh was small but genuine, the first in days. "You with your dog-eared Neruda. I thought you were too good for my cynical ass." Jane squeezed her hand. Still do sometimes. But that's the beauty, ain't it? We fit the broken parts together. They lingered in the hotel room that night, the city lights flickering through thin curtains. Mary traced the curve of Jane's shoulder, her skin warm under calloused fingertips. Love me, she whispered, not a question but a plea born of the day's unraveling. Jane answered with kisses slow and deliberate, mapping the map of scars both seen and unseen. In the quiet after their breaths synced, Mary felt the first crack in the wall shed built around her past. Not breaking yet but shifting enough to let light in. The drive stretched into days, crossing into Idaho where the landscape turned vast and unforgiving, sagebrush stretching to the horizon like forgotten promises. They stopped at a diner off I-84, pie cooling on checkered tables, the waitress calling them sugar as she poured refills. Mary's phone buzzed, a text from her editor back in Seattle chasing a lead on a corruption scandal, but she silenced it. This was her story now, the one that had simmered unspoken for decades. Nights blurred into motel stops, neon signs buzzing outside windows. In one in Boise, Jane read aloud from a battered copy of The Price of Salt, her voice weaving through the dark like smoke. Mary lay with her head in Jane's lap, fingers idly twisting a strand of auburn hair. What if they're all gone, she murmured, the obituary's date mocking her from memory. What if there's nothing left to uncover? Then you get closure on your own terms, Jane replied, her tone steady as the hum of the highway. And we keep driving. To the Grand Canyon or some dive bar in Texas. Anywhere that feels like freedom. Mary turned to kiss her palm, tasting salt and certainty. You make it sound simple. It ain't. But it's ours. By the time they hit the Wyoming border, the clipping had become a talisman tucked into Mary's glove compartment alongside faded photos of Jane at 20-something, wild-haired and grinning in a college protest line. The plains opened wide, sky swallowing the road whole, and Mary felt the pull of Ohio like gravity tugging at her core. Shed left as a girl, furious and afraid, now she returned a woman forged in fires, her hand intertwined with Jane's the whole way. They detoured through a small-town fair in Cheyenne, cotton candy air thick with laughter and the crack of baseball bats. Mary watched families cluster around picnic blankets, a pang sharp in her chest for what might have been. Jane noticed, pulling her aside behind a Ferris wheel creaking slow against the dusk. Hey, she said, tilting Mary's chin up. You're not that girl anymore. You're here. With me. And that's the truth they can't touch. Mary nodded, swallowing hard, the fair's lights blurring in her vision. I know. Just. It hits different seeing it all laid out like this. Jane drew her close, foreheads touching, breath mingling. Then let's make our own memories. Right now. They rode the wheel up into the cooling night, the world shrinking below them, a patchwork of lives unfolding. Up there suspended, Mary let the tears come quiet and cleansing, Jane holding her through it all, a silent vow against the wind. The miles piled on, crossing Nebraska cornfields, whispering secrets to the breeze. Mary's mind wandered to her mother, the silent crier in that farmhouse kitchen. Had she ever regretted the silence? Or her father with his flat pronouncement, had regret ever cracked that stone facade? The questions looped endless until Jane pulled over at a roadside stand for corn on the cob, butter dripping down chins as they laughed at the mess. You got a bit right there, Jane teased, dabbing at Mary's lip with her thumb. Mary caught her wrist, kissing the inside pulse fluttering soft. Thanks for this. For you. Always, darlin'. Now eat before it gets cold. That night in a Lincoln motel, the storm rolled in thunder rumbling like distant artillery. They made love, fierce and unhurried, lightning flashing across their skin, illuminating the lines time had drawn. Afterward, tangled in sheets, Mary whispered into Jane's hair, I think I'm ready. Whatever it is. Jane hummed agreement, her arms a fortress. Then we'll face it together. Dawn broke clear as they entered Iowa flatlands, giving way to the familiar hum of home. Mary's hands clenched the wheel tighter, the odometer ticking closer to the state line. The obituary lay heavy in her lap, now pulled out for the 100th time, words worn from tracing. Who sent it? A cousin maybe, or a sibling shed half forgotten. The truth waited just beyond the border, a reckoning 40 years delayed. They crossed into Ohio under a sky heavy with clouds, the welcome sign blurring past like a half-remembered dream. Mary's heart pounded a drumbeat in her ears, Jane squeezing her thigh in silent support. The road narrowed, farmhouses dotting the landscape, echoes of the one shed fled. And then there it was, the turnoff to Willow Creek, the town that had birthed and banished her. She pulled over, gravel crunching under tires, breathing deep, the air thick with earth and memory. Jane unbuckled, leaning over to kiss her temple. One step at a time, love. Mary nodded, stepping out, legs unsteady as a fawn's. The house stood at the end of the lane, weathered but standing, paint peeling like old skin. Her family home, or what was left of it. This was at the edge of the cliff shed jumped from decades ago. And now with Jane at her side she was ready to look down. The porch creaked under Mary's boots, splintered wood giving way to the ghosts inside. She knocked 3 times, knuckles white against the faded blue door, her pulse a wild thing in her throat. Jane stood a step behind, hand brushing Mary's back, a whisper of "You got this" in the touch. The door opened slow, a woman in her late 40s peering out, graying hair pulled into a loose bun, eyes widening like she'd seen the dead rise. Maggie. Aunt Ruth's voice cracked, the name from childhood slipping out unbidden. "Is that you?" Mary swallowed the air between them, thick as humidity. "It's Mary now. Mary Thompson. Or just Mary. And yeah, it's me." Ruth's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing quick. She stepped forward, pulling Mary into a hug, bone-thin arms surprisingly strong. "Oh God, we thought you were gone for good. Come in, come in." Jane's too. The kitchen unfolded like a time capsule, same linoleum scuffed from years of footsteps, same oak table scarred from family suppers. But emptier now, dust motes dancing in the afternoon light slanting through lace curtains. Ruth bustled with tea leaves rattling in the kettle, her chatter nervous as a bird's. "Your father passed 10 years back," heart gave out. "Mother lingered till 2015, Alzheimer's took her slow. But the other's your brother Tom, he'll be home soon, he's just down at the mill." Mary nodded, sinking into a chair, the wood cool against her palms. Jane settled beside her, fingers lacing discreetly under the table, a lifeline. "And the obituary? Who sent it?" Ruth paused mid-pour, steam curling up like regret. "That was me. Found it in Daddy's old desk after he died. Tucked away with your letters, the ones you sent those first years asking to come home. I meant to mail it sooner, but life. Kids, grandkids. Cowardice mostly. I'm sorry, Maggie." "Mary." The name settled heavy, Mary's chest aching with the weight of it. "Why declare me dead? I get the anger, the disappointment. But that." Ruth's eyes dropped to her hands, twisting a dish rag. "It was Daddy's doing. The church elders, they preached at fire and brimstone about the sin. Said to mourn you proper, cut the ties clean. Mama, she never agreed, but she followed him like always. We all did. Buried you in words because facing you alive was too hard." Jane squeezed Mary's hand, her voice gentle when she spoke. "That sounds like a heavy load to carry all these years." Ruth nodded, wiping her eyes. "It was. Tom, he drank for a spell after. Blamed himself for not fighting harder that night. And me, I named my girl after you, Margaret Ruth, but we call her Maggie. Kept you alive that way." Mary's breath hitched a sigh, slipping out soft and shattered. "A niece. God. Tell me about her." The story spilled, then Ruth's voice warming as she described little Maggie, 10 years old, with Mary's green eyes and a laugh like summer rain. They pored over photos, faded Polaroids of Thanksgivings and birthdays, Mary's absence a shadow in every frame. Jane listened, her thumb stroking Mary's knuckle, a rhythm of calm amid the storm. Tom arrived at dusk, flannel shirt dusted with sawdust, his face a map of hard years. "Maggie," he said, stopping short in the doorway as if the floor might swallow him. "Holy shit. It's really you." "Brother," she whispered, standing to meet him halfway, his hug rough and real, smelling of pine and engine oil. "Missed you," he muttered into her hair, voice thick. "Thought we'd lost you for good." They talked late into the night, pie cooling on the counter, Tom cracking open beers, the label peeling like old wounds. He spoke of the farm sold off after Dad died, the mill job that kept him afloat the wife had left when the drinking got bad. "And you," he said, eyes on Mary. "Heard rumors over the years. Saw your byline in the Dispatch once, a piece on that scandal in Columbus. Proud as hell but too chicken shit to reach out." Mary leaned into Jane, had fetched blankets against the chill seeping through cracks. "I built a life out west. Journalism kept me moving. And her." She gestured to Jane, voice steadying. "This is Jane, my partner. 20 years come spring." Tom raised his bottle, a nod of acceptance, no questions asked. "Good for you, sis." Dad's ghost, he hung heavy, but times change. "Maggie's got 2 moms in town, you know. Teachers. Fine folks." The word moms landed soft, a bridge across the chasm. Ruth smiled faint, watching them. "We ain't perfect. But we'd like to try. If you'll let us." Mary's throat closed, a nod all she could manage. Jane covered for her, excusing them to the guest room upstairs, creaky stairs protesting underfoot. In the dim light of a bedside lamp they undressed, slow, shedding the day's layers. "You were brave today," Jane murmured, lips brushing Mary's collarbone. "Stronger than you know." Mary pulled her close, skin to skin, a sigh melting into the pillow. "Felt like drowning half the time. But you make me believe in second acts." They moved together, gentle and deep, the house settling around them like an old friend, wary but willing. Sleep came fitful dreams of yellowed paper and open graves, but Jane's arm across her waist chased the shadows back. Morning brought little Maggie herself, pigtails bouncing as she barreled into the kitchen, cereal bowl in hand. "Aunt Mary," she chirped, climbing into her lap like it was the most natural thing. "Grandma said you're a detective. Did you catch any bad guys out west?" Mary laughed, the sound rusty but real, hugging the girl close. "A few. But the best ones are the stories that stick with you. Like family." They spent the day wandering Willow Creek, the creek itself murmuring over stones, Mary pointing out the tire swing where Shed dreamed as a kid, Tom trailing with stories of his own. Jane fit seamless, charming Ruth with questions about quilting, chatting with Maggie about books, her teacher's voice slipping out natural as breathing. By afternoon they sat on the porch, swing creaking in rhythm, the sun dipping low, painting the fields gold. "I was wrong to stay away so long," Mary admitted to Tom, voice low as Maggie chased fireflies in the yard. "Should have fought harder, came back sooner." He shook his head, clapping her shoulder. "You survived. That's fight enough. And hey, you brought Jane. She's a keeper." Mary glanced inside where Jane helped Ruth with dishes, laughter floating out. "Yeah. She is." That night the power flickered out, storm clouds gathering thick. They gathered by candlelight, Ruth pulling out an old photo album, pages crackling like whispers. "There you were, baby," Mary gap-toothed grin on a pony, the family whole and unbroken. "Mama kept this hidden, Dad never knew," she said, tracing the edge. "Said you were her heart always." Tears tracked silent down Mary's cheeks, Jane wiping them away with her thumb. "It's okay, love. Let it out." The storm broke, then rain lashing the windows, thunder rolling deep. Tom stoked the fire, embers glowing like buried truths. "We wrote letters after you left," he confessed, voice rough. "Burned 'em mostly, but a few survived. In the attic if you want 'em." Mary nodded, the offer a key turning in a long locked door. "Yeah. I do." They climbed the pull-down stairs, flashlight beams cutting the dust motes, boxes labeled in faded marker. Tom unearthed a shoebox tied with twine, letters spilling out, yellowed envelopes addressed to Maggie in a child's careful script. Mary's hands shook, untying the knot, paper crinkling under fingers. The first one from 1980, her own handwriting shaky, from a payphone in Portland. "Dear Mom, Dad, I miss you. I'm sorry if I hurt you. But I'm okay. Learning to type at community college. Found a roommate who's kind. Love, Maggie." She read on, voice breaking on the ones from her family, penned but never sent. "Daddy's scrawl stiff and sparse, we pray for your soul. Mama's looping cursive, I see your face in the clouds. Forgive me." Jane read over her shoulder, silent tears for them both. "They loved you," she whispered when the box emptied. In their broken way. Mary folded the last letter, a sigh heavy as the rain outside. "I know. Now." Downstairs they shared the weight, Ruth brewing tea, Tom stoking the fire anew. Maggie curled in Mary's lap, asleep to the storm, her small hand fisted in Mary's shirt. "This is what they stole," she murmured to Jane across the flicker of flame. "And what I get back?" Jane smiled soft, reaching to brush a curl from the girl's forehead. "Worth the miles." Sleep claimed them late, the guest bed a cocoon against the world's roar. Mary dreamed not of graves but gardens wild and blooming, Jane tending them with her steady hands. The next days blurred into a tentative rhythm, mornings with coffee on the porch, Ruth's stories filling the quiet afternoons, with Maggie tag and tickle fights, laughter echoing off barn walls. Tom took them to the mill, saws humming like old friends, showing Mary the lathe where he carved bowls from oak. "You always had the words," he said, watching her note the grain. "I carve 'em out." Jane wandered the town library, unearthing local histories, donating a stack of her own novels to the shelf. She fit here too, her warmth thawing the edges of Mary's isolation. Evenings brought board games, battered Monopoly sets, and cackles over fake money, Ruth declaring bankruptcy with a grin. One dusk Mary and Jane slipped away to the creek, rocks skipping across water like skipped heartbeats. "You think we could stay a bit?" she asked, tossing a pebble, the plink swallowed by current. Jane nodded, lacing arms around her waist from behind. "As long as you need. This place, it's growing on me." Mary turned in her hold, kissing her slow, the sunset bleeding pink across the sky. "It's you that's home, darlin'. Always has been." But the past tugged, insistent, a call from her editor pulling her back to Seattle, a deadline looming on that corruption piece. They planned to leave in a week, Tom promising visits, Ruth pressing pie into coolers. The night before departure Maggie clung tight at bedtime, storytime, her voice small. "Don't go away forever, Aunt Mary." Mary hugged her, fierce, whispering promises into soft hair. "Never again, kiddo. Pinky swear." Dawn came too soon, taillights fading on the gravel drive, Mary's eyes on the rearview, tears blurring the house. Jane drove first, her hand on the gearshift, Mary's on her thigh. "You okay?" she asked, Miles stacking silent. Mary sighed, leaning head on the window, fields rolling by. "Yeah. Hollow but full. Like breathing after holding it too long." They detoured south through Indiana, Bloomington's college town buzzing with youth, Jane pointing out indie bookstores, Mary snapping photos for a feature on Heartland reinventions. In a cafe tucked into an alley they shared waffles, drowning in syrup, talk turning to futures. "What now?" she asked, fork midway to mouth. "Back to the grind. Or something more?" Jane grinned, mischief in her eyes. "How about we write our own obituary? The living kind. Full of road trips and bad karaoke." Mary laughed, the sound freeing. "Deal. But first, that story. Truth's gotta out." The drive home stretched, lazy stops at diners for biscuits and gravy, truck stops for coffee, black as midnight. In Missouri they hiked a bluff overlooking the Mississippi River, wind whipping hair wild, Jane spinning Mary into a dance, laughter bubbling up unchecked. "You make me feel alive," she gasped, breathless against Jane's neck. "Good, 'cause that's the plan." By Illinois the clipping felt lighter, tucked away with the letters, a chapter closed, not erased. They crossed into Wisconsin, cheese curds and craft brews fueling late-night talks of adoption maybe, or fostering kids like Maggie had lost their way. Seattle welcomed them, rain-slicked, arms open, Mary diving into her desk, the story pouring out, not just the scandal but woven with threads of home reclaimed. Jane graded papers at the kitchen table, red pen scratching soft, her hum the soundtrack to creation. Weeks later a package arrived from Ohio, photos and a note from Ruth. "For your wall. Build something new with the old." Mary hung them beside Jane's protest shots, a gallery of survival. That night over wine they toasted absent friends, present loves, the table set for two but room for more. The truth uncovered wasn't absolution but invitation, a door cracked to light. And in Jane's eyes across the candle flicker Mary saw forever, not as endpoint but endless road. Months slipped by like pages in a well-loved book, Seattle reclaiming them with its gray skies and green markets. Mary's article hit the stands, a double byline, her words on corruption tangled with a sidebar on family secrets, the editor calling it gold. Fan mail trickled in, but the real reward was Jane's pride beaming over breakfast, bacon sizzling as she read aloud. "You're changing the world one truth at a time," she said, kissing Mary's temple grease-smeared lips. Mary grinned, waving it off. "Just paying rent on the life we got." But the pull of Ohio lingered, a quiet hum under their days. Phone calls grew regular, Ruth's voice tinny through speakers sharing recipes, or Maggie's latest mischief, Tom's gruff updates on the mill. Jane joined in, her drawl blending with their stories of school plays and student heartbreaks. It felt like mending a quilt, patching holes with care. One crisp fall evening Mary came home to Jane on the couch, laptop glowing, scripts of lesson plans scattered. "Pack your bags," she said, closing the lid with a click. Tom called. "Maggie's school thing, a play. They want us there." Mary paused, coat half off, heart tripping. "Us?" "Yeah. Family seats. Front row." The flight east was quick, turbulence jostling like old nerves, but Jane's hand in hers smoothed the edges. Willow Creek greeted them with autumn leaves crunching under tires, Ruth waving from the porch, pie warm in her hands. Maggie tackled them at the door, script clutched tight. "You came," she squealed, dragging them inside. The auditorium buzzed, parents fidgeting in folding chairs, Maggie center stage as the brave orphan in a homemade musical, her voice clear and true, hitting notes that tugged Mary's chest. Jane squeezed her hand, whispering, "That's our girl," as applause thundered down. Afterward in the gym, punch bowls sweating on tables, Ruth pulled Mary aside, eyes bright. "She's got your fire. And your name in her heart." Dinner at the house stretched long, table groaning with roast chicken and cornbread, Tom carving with steady hands. Talk flowed easy from politics to weather, dipping into deeper waters when Maggie asked about Mary's job. "Do you write about us, Aunt Mary?" Mary smiled, fork pausing. "Sometimes. The best stories are the ones that heal." Later Jane and Ruth cleared plates, leaving Mary and Tom on the porch, swing stars pricking the black. "You staying a while?" he asked, rocking slow. "Thinking on it. Got leave from the paper." Jane too, her school's on break. "Good. Place needs you. We need you." The days unfolded, soft mornings with coffee and crosswords, Maggie claiming Mary for bike rides down country lanes, wind whistling secrets. Afternoons Jane helped at the library, story hours with kids, wide-eyed, her voice painting worlds. Evenings brought fireside chats, Ruth sharing mama's recipes, the ones she'd hidden from dad, afraid he'd toss em for sin. One night, rain pattering on tin, Mary found the attic stairs calling her up, boxes whispering. She sifted through relics, dad's war medals, mom's embroidery hoops, threads tangled like regrets. A letter slipped free addressed to her in Mom's hand, postmarked 1995. My dearest Maggie, it began, ink faded but firm. I was wrong. Pride blinded me, but love never left. Forgive if you can. Your mother always. Tears blurred the page, Mary clutching it to her chest, a sob breaking free. Jane found her there, kneeling in dust, arms wrapping tight. What is it, love? She handed over the letter, words trembling. She knew. All along. Jane read, silent, then pulled her down to the floorboards, rocking gentle. Then she's at peace now. And so are you. They stayed 2 weeks, weaving into the fabric of the place bike chains oiled with Tom's tools, dinners where Jane's stories drew laughs from Ruth's quiet shell. Maggie gifted Mary a drawing, 2 women holding hands under rainbows labeled Aunt Mary and Aunt Jane forever. The goodbye tugged harder this time, airport hugs lingering, Ruth pressing a quilt into Jane's arms. Made it from Mom's scraps, she said. For your bed back west. On the plane, Mary leaned into Jane, head on shoulder. Feels like we got a second family. We do. And the first one's mending. Back in Seattle, winter bit deep, fog cloaking the sound, but their apartment glowed warmer, photos from Ohio pinned to the fridge. Mary pitched a series to her editor, personal essays on Lost and Found Kin, the green light coming quick. Jane signed up for a writing workshop, her own words bubbling up, poems of Bridges and Burns. Holiday cards arrived first from Ohio, glittery scrawl from Maggie, a photo of the tree strung with lights, Tom and Ruth beaming. They hosted a small gathering, friends from the bookstore toasting with eggnog, Jane's laughter ringing as Mary recounted Maggie's play. Midnight found them on the balcony, city hum below, snow flurrying soft. To truths uncovered, Mary murmured, clinking mugs. And loves that endure, Jane replied, kissing her cold nose. Cheers to that. Spring thawed the city, cherry blossoms dusting streets pink. Mary's essays published to quiet acclaim, letters pouring in from readers with their own buried stories. One stood out from a woman in Chicago, her aunt declared dead for the same sin, now seeking reunion. Right back, Mary did, words flowing like creeks after rain. Jane bloomed to her poems, chapbook bound, reading at a cafe downtown, voice steady as she spoke of hands clasped across divides. Mary sat front row, pride swelling like it had in that gym, tears pricking as applause rose. Summer brought the road again, this time eastbound with purpose, a family wedding, Tom's daughter tying knots in a barn draped with lights. They drove the Subaru packed with quilts and coolers, stopping at diners for pie and tails. In Ohio, the ceremony unfolded, vows exchanged under beams, Maggie flower girl petals scattering like confetti. Reception tables groaned with barbecue and beer, Jane dancing with Ruth, her steps light and sure. Mary watched from the edge, Tom sidling up with a plate. You did good, sis. Bringing her home. We both did, she said, clinking bottles. Took time but worth every mile. Fireflies blinked in the fields as night deepened, couples swaying to fiddles. Jane pulled Mary onto the floor, hand in hers, a slow turn under strings. Remember our first dance, she whispered ear to ear. Backyard wedding, fairy lights and cold feet. Mary hummed against her neck. How could I forget? You steadied me then too. Always will. They camped that night, tent pitched in the yard, stars wheeling overhead. Crickets chorused as they lay, tangled sleeping bags zipped as one. Mary traced Jane's ribs, fingers mapping the rise and fall. What if we'd never met, she murmured into dark. Jane shifted, kissing her forehead. But we did. And that's the story that matters. Fall circled back, leaves turning fire, they flew east again for harvest festival, pumpkins carving grins on porches. Maggie started school, tales of friends and fractions spilling over phone lines. Ruth sent apples bruised but sweet jam bubbling on their stove. One evening, Mary's editor called, promotion in hand, bureau chief with a corner office. Take it, she urged Jane over takeout cartons. You earned it. Mary hesitated, fork twirling noodles. Means more travel. You okay with that? Jane set her chopsticks down, eyes soft. Means more stories. More you. I'm in. The office came with windows overlooking the market, ferries cutting white wakes. Mary dove into assignments, features on resilience from coast to heartland. Jane taught with renewed fire, her class penning letters to lost kin inspired by Mary's words. Winter solstice brought snow, Seattle blanketed rare and hush. They hosted Ruth and Tom, plane tickets, a surprise, Maggie's squeal echoing through arrivals. The house filled, chaos of boots and cocoa stories overlapping like harmonies. On Christmas Eve, fire crackling, they exchanged gifts, simple things, a carved bowl from Tom, a poem from Jane framed. Ruth pressed envelopes into hands, letters from Mom's hope chest, words of apology scrawled in youth. Mary read hers by lamplight, tears salting the page. Thank you, she whispered, hugging Ruth close. For keeping her voice alive. Family, she replied, simple and sure. New Year's dawned, bright resolutions whispered over mimosas. Stay connected, Tom pledged, raising glass. No more ghosts. To that, Mary echoed, clinking rims. The visitors left, snow melting to slush, but the warmth lingered. Mary and Jane walked the market stalls, oysters steaming in air crisp. Hand in hand they planned spring Ohio again, perhaps a cabin in the hills. You think it gets easier? She asked Jane over chowder bowls, steam rising. Loving them. Yeah. But the hard parts, they make the good sweeter. Mary nodded, soup warming from within. Like us? Jane grinned, stealing a oyster. Damn right. The year turned, seasons cycling steady. Mary's book deal landed, memoir of roads reclaimed, Jane editing chapters late into nights, red pen gentle. They read proofs on the porch swing, shipped from Ohio, creaking under weight of words. Launch night bookstore packed, familiar faces mingled with new Ohio contingent flown in for the fuss. Maggie read a passage, voice clear, her pride beaming back at Mary. Applause thundered, Jane at her side, hand clasped tight. After, in the quiet of home, champagne fizzing, they danced slow to records scratching soft. You did it, love, Jane murmured, swaying. We did, she corrected, spinning her out, then in. Every step. The truth uncovered rippled outward, letters from strangers, stories shared in cafe shops. Mary spoke at panels, voice steady on stages, lip bright. Jane published her collection, cover etched with two hands intertwined. One dawn in bed sheets tangled, Mary woke to Jane's breathing even beside her. She watched the rise and fall, light slanting gold across cheekbones. 40 years shed run from shadows, now she chased light hand in hand. A sigh escaped, soft as prayer. Thank you, she whispered to the woman who'd claimed her whole. Jane stirred, eyes fluttering open, smile sleepy sweet. Morning, love. Yeah. The best kind. Years folded like accordions, summers in Ohio, winters west, blending lines until home meant both. Mary retired at 60, the bureau chief title traded for freelance peace, her byline sporadic but sharp. Jane followed suit, classroom handed to a bright-eyed successor, her days filled with workshops for writers healing through words. They bought a cabin upstate New York, woods whispering around, a lake porch swing mirroring the one from Willow Creek. Summers brought the family north, Tom fishing with Mary, lines cast lazy, Ruth quilting with Jane, needles clicking soft. Maggie grew teen, now lanky with questions, her girlfriend shy at first, then bold hugs all around. One July 4th, fireflies dancing, they gathered round a pit, sparks rising like prayers. Tom raised a beer, toast sloshing. To Maggie and Aunt Mary the firebrands. Laughter rippled, Mary clinking bottles, her arm around Jane's waist. To all of us. The ones who stayed. Maggie leaned into her other side, phone forgotten for once. Tell the story again, she urged. The letter, the one that brought you back. Mary obliged, voice weaving through smoke, the obituary, the road, the letters unearthed. Jane added, flourishes her drawl, painting the diner, stops the dances and storms. The kids listened, wrapped her girlfriend's hand in hers, a mirror of their own. Later by the lake, Jane and Mary walked shore, crunching underfoot, water lapping gentle. 65 now, she said, tracing a wrinkle at Jane's eye. Feel older? Jane laughed, turning to kiss her palm. Wiser maybe. Sexier definitely. Mary pulled her close, wavelets tugging at ankles. You're still my adventure. And you're my anchor. Autumns came, colored sharp, they drove the eastern seaboard, leaves flaming, roadside stops at inns with four posters. In Virginia they traced civil rights trails, museums echoing with voices long silenced. Mary wrote essays for small presses, words on forgiveness, generational knots untied. Jane illustrated them, sketches of hands clasped across maps, her lines fluid as feeling. The book sold, quiet local readings where folks lingered after sharing their own mended breaks. Back at the cabin, winters wrapped them close, fires roaring, books piled high. Tom visited, less knees giving out but calls steady, his voice gravel with love. Ruth followed in spring, pneumonia swift, her quilt unfinished on the frame. They flew for the service, Willow Creek church filled with faces old and new, Maggie's eulogy fierce and fond. After, in the kitchen, now Maggie's with her wife, they sifted Ruth's things, needles and thread, a legacy. Keep quilting, Mary urged, passing the hoop. She made beauty from scraps. Maggie nodded, tears salting stitches. Like you did with us. Tom lingered longer, that visit, talks deep on the porch swing he carved himself. Regrets, he admitted, pipe smoke curling slow. Should have burned that obituary myself. Mary covered his hand, gnarled but warm. You fixed it, brother. That's what counts. He nodded, eyes on horizon. Yeah. Love you, sis. Love you too. He passed that winter snow, burying the farm, quiet as a sigh. The funeral packed kin from branches, Mary never knew, cousins hugging tight, stories of shared blood. Maggie inherited the house, turning it to a bed and breakfast rooms named for ghosts laid to rest. Mary and Jane wintered there, sometimes helping with linens, guests drawn to the warmth. One guest, a young reporter, eyes hungry for leads, Mary mentored over coffee, tales of chases and heartaches. "You'll find your story," she said. "Just keep knocking." Spring always called them South, blooms bursting DC. Cherry festivals, crowds parting for their linked arms. They marched in parades, rainbows waving, signs bold with age-earned pride. Jane read at festivals, her voice carrying over lawns, poems of late-blooming loves. 68 now, Mary felt the miles in her hips but not her heart. A letter arrived from that Chicago woman years back, her aunt found reconciled thanks to Mary's words. Enclosed a photo, two women gray-haired grinning at a beach. "Your courage started this," she wrote. "Thank you." Mary framed it beside Mom's letter, the wall a testament. Jane hung beside it, their wedding shot faded but fierce. "Our gallery," she said, stepping back. "Lives intertwined." Maggie called that fall baby on the way, a girl they'd name Ruth. "Come see us," she urged. "Be aunts proper." They flew west, this time Seattle to Ohio, the plane dipping through clouds. The nursery painted soft blues, Maggie nesting with books on parenting. Jane gifted a quilt pieced from Ruth's scraps, stars sewn in silk. "You'll be grandma," she teased Mary over tea. Mary blinked, tears pricking. "God. Yeah." The birth came, swift summer heat, thick, little Ruth wailing, lusty, into arms. Mary held her first, tiny fist curling round finger, heart full to bursting. Jane's turn next, rocking gentle lullabies low and sweet. Back at the cabin, fall deepened, leaves carpeting paths. They hiked slow, staffs tapping earth, birds calling overhead. One afternoon on the dock, Mary paused, rod idle, fish uninterested. "Think that's enough?" she asked Jane beside her, line drifting. Jane reeled an empty hook. "For what?" "Life. Stories. The chase." Jane set her pole down, turning full face to the sun. "Never enough. But good measure." Mary nodded, water sparkling below. "Yeah. Good measure." Winters softened now, less bite, more blanket days by the fire, puzzles pieced slow. Jane published a final collection dedicated to Mary, words of enduring flame. Readings drew crowds, old friends, new fans, her voice thinner but true. Mary's turn came, quiet, a chapbook of letters, real and imagined, to the family shed claimed. Launch at the cabin driveway, lined with cars, kin spilling onto lawn. Toasts raised to the womanhood uncovered, not just truth but grace. 70 loomed, birthdays marked with cake and calls, Maggie's voice tinny with little Ruth's babble. They visited springtime's park picnics, little one toddling, grass stains on knees. "Grandma Mary," she chirped, climbing into lap, book clutched tight. "Read please." Mary obliged, pages turning slow, Jane's hand on her knee steady as ever. One summer storm felled the old oak by the cabin, thunder cracking limbs like bones. Cleanup days Tom would have cursed, but they hired help, youth from town swinging axes cheerful. Jane found a carving in the stump, initials M and J etched deep from a long ago date. "Look," she called Mary over fingers, tracing grooves. "Us. From the beginning." Mary knelt, rain damp earth kissing the wood, then her. "Yeah. From the beginning." Fall brought news, Maggie expecting again, a boy this time. Celebrations, virtual screens glowing with grins. Winter wrapped, gentle holidays, hybrid kin, west and east toasting across miles. 72 dawned clear, Mary waking to Jane's coughs, ragged in the dark. Doctors came, tests blurred into verdicts, lung shadow growing swift. Jane waved off fuss, her way practical to the end. "Write it," she urged, Mary, pen hovering over journal. "Our story. The whole damn thing." Mary did, nights by the bed, words pouring, ink black as fear. Jane edited, faint pencil marks, grace notes and margins. "Publish it," she whispered, one dusk light fading. "For the ones coming after. I will love. Promise." Spring bloomed, defiant azaleas, flaming beds. Jane slipped away, quiet as dawn, Mary holding hand, cool now, her vigil ending with a sigh released. The cabin emptied, birds silent, lake still. Funeral, small lakeside, friends and kin scattering ashes on water ripples, carrying her home. Maggie spoke of the woman who'd taught her to quilt words and hearts. Mary stood silent, tears feeding the waves. Summer healed slow walks with little Ruth, hand in hers, stories of Grandma Jane, the one with the laugh like bells. Maggie helped sort papers, journals bound neat. "Publish it, Mom," she said, using the word easy now. "Shed want that." The book came, fall leaves turning with pages. Title simple, enduring truths, readings in bookstores east and west, crowds leaning in for the love that outlasted declarations. Royalties funded scholarships for young writers, queer and questioning voices lifted. Mary wintered alone, but not the cabin filled with echoes, Jane's quilt draped couch, her scent faint in pillows. Calls from Maggie sustained little Ruth's drawings crayoned hearts. 75 brought a letter from a reader her family mended by the book. You gave us words, she wrote. Thank you. Mary replied, steady hand sharing more the ongoing tale. One dawn lake misted she sat porch swing creaking solo coffee steaming. A breeze stirred leaves whispering old songs. Sigh escaped soft gratitude woven through grief. The truth uncovered wasn't ending but echo lives rippling outward loves declared not dead but deeply alive. In the quiet Mary smiled sky lightning gold. Yes, she murmured to the wind. Good measure indeed. And in that resonance the story lingered not as loss but legacy, hands clasped across time forever mending.